So today I'm going to show you my entire collection of Warner Archive Blu-rays. And what you see right here is just the tip of the iceberg. I've actually got over 80 movies to talk about. Let's get going. How's it going, friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel where we dust off old movies. My name is Daniel, and I've been talking to you a lot about Warner Archive Blu-rays on this channel, covering the new releases, doing haul videos, such like that. And I thought it's about time I just show you everything I own. I've got over 80 Blu-rays from Warner Archive. Let's talk about all of them. So kicking off is 42nd Street, which is part of kind of a trilogy of Busby Berkeley 1930s musicals. Warner Archive put all of them out. This one's actually my least favorite of the trilogy. My main problem with this movie is it holds all the musical numbers until the end, so it's not a musical at all for most of the movie, and then you get to the end and it crams them all together. So you kind of miss musical numbers through most of the movie, and when you get to the end, it's almost too much. That's kind of a problem, but it's got a great cast. It's certainly entertaining. That's 42nd Street. It's a classic movie. Most people love it more than I do. A Night at the Opera, Marx Brothers. I really enjoy the Marx Brothers and this movie. My favorite part is Groucho and Chico going over a contract. It's incredibly funny. This is a very funny movie. And it joins Jason Takes Manhattan for movies that promise to take place somewhere, but mostly take place on a boat. And then we've got Adventures of Don Juan. I talk about this movie every chance I get, so if you're a viewer, you're probably sick of hearing me talk about this movie. It's a great swashbuckler with Errol Flynn. Came out 10 years after The Adventures of Robin Hood. I think it's almost as good. You got Errol Flynn playing an even more interesting character because he's a guy who really has to go through an arc. He's not a perfect guy. He starts off in kind of a bad place, has to learn and grow throughout the movie, and I really appreciate that. But it's also just got great action and romance. It's just awesome. Next up, The Ballad of Cable Hogue, which is a Sam Peckinpah movie, one of his lightest movies, and actually one of my favorites from him. It's starring Jason Robards as a guy who discovers water out in the desert, builds a business around it, falls in love with Stella Stevens, hangs out with a crazy preacher played by David Warner, and it's just a fun hangout movie. I really, really dig it. Next, here's one that I haven't actually seen yet. That's The Bells Are Ringing. The plastic's still on it, as you can see. It's a musical from the early 60s with Dean Martin and Judy Holliday. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. I like musicals from that time period. I like Dean Martin movies, so I'm sure I'm going to enjoy that one. Next up, The Big Sleep. Warner Archive put out all of the Bogey and Bacall movies. This is a great one. Just such a fun, classic noir movie. It's a movie I've seen several times. I still don't totally understand the plot. The actors famously have said they don't understand the plot either. It's very confusing, but it's so fun and charming, and Bogey and Bacall are awesome in it. So I'm a huge fan of that movie. Next up, Camille, romantic drama. This came out just this past month from Warner Archive, starring Greta Garbo and Robert Taylor. And Greta Garbo is awesome in the movie, an incredible performance. I don't think the rest of the movie around her is quite so awesome, but if you're a Garbo fan, you've probably seen it several times because it's just such a classic from her. Confessions of a Nazi Spy, another one of this month's releases. This one starring Edward G. Robinson. Really interesting historical curiosity. It came out before the United States joined World War II. It's very much a political message movie about how Nazis are bad and America's got to take them down. And America pretty much did. So that's cool. What a weird thing to say. Next up is Corvette Summer, starring Mark Hamill and Annie Potts. Annie Potts is the secretary from Ghostbusters, and she's so charming and cute in this movie. Love her in this. And this is Mark Hamill's follow-up to Star Wars, actually. It came out in 1978. It's a fun 70s comedy. And I'm a Mark Hamill fan, of course. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and he's such a wonderful personality. And I think that's a fun movie. It's not great, but it's definitely enjoyable. Here we've got one of my favorite films of all time, Curse of Frankenstein. I was so excited when they released this because I had the UK Blu-ray before this, and it didn't look that good. This movie's never looked that great restoration-wise until Warner Archive put it out. It's by far the best this movie has ever looked. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. It's my favorite Hammer film, and I think Peter Cushing is just especially so brilliant in it. I love the direction to focus on the evil mad doctor instead of the monster. I think that was such a good way to take this story. Dark of the Sun. Okay, if you haven't seen this movie, you gotta seek it out. This is a 1960s hard-hitting, tough guy action movie starring Rod Taylor and Jim Brown. Jim Brown, just awesome in The Dirty Dozen, awesome in this movie. It's involving a train. It's got a chainsaw fight, as you can see on the front, and it's got Yvette Mimieux, who is also with Rod Taylor in The Time Machine. So that's really cool. I really, really enjoyed that film. Next up, Dark Passage. This is probably the most underrated of the Bogey and Bacall movies. It is a great noir film, very experimental in that it starts off with all POV from Humphrey Bogart. It stays just from his point of view for most of the movie, and that's very unusual to see in a 1940s noir film. Bogey and Bacall are just awesome in this. That's a great movie. Next up, Designing Woman. I actually really like this movie. It's not a classic by any means, but it's directed by Vincent Minnelli. It's a romantic comedy starring Lauren Bacall, again, and Gregory Peck, and they are so good together. And it's a big, bright, colorful 50s movie. I really enjoy it. Next up, Dial M for Murder. I think this is one of the most underrated Hitchcock movies. Not often named as one of his best, but I probably would say it's one of his best. It is starring Ray Milland, and he is conspiring to kill his wife, played by Grace Kelly. You've also got Robert Cummings in there, and it's just brutally intense. And I think the conversation scenes involving Ray Milland of like how he's going to kill his wife and why he wants to is all so darkly fascinating. And this movie was released in 3D, and this actual release I believe it has the 3D version, but I haven't actually watched that. I've just watched the regular version, but that's excellent. Okay, I might have to start going faster. This is Dr. X. Warner Archive released 2 Michael Curtiz horror films from the pre-code era. This is 1932, and it's a weird, bizarre, mad scientist horror film that goes way crazier and darker than you expect it to. I really, really like it. Then we got Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. I watched this one just recently. It's a 70s TV movie. I'll have more to say about it on my end of the month wrap-up video that'll be coming up like next week, but overall I thought it was okay. That's what I got to say. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, one of the greatest horror films of all time. This was one of my most wanted Blu-rays for so many years. For so many years, if you asked me, what do you most want on Blu-ray? I would have said this. Was ecstatic when Warner Archive released it. And it's one of the best horror films ever made. One of the only horror films to have gotten a Best Actor win at the Oscars for Frederick March, playing both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde brilliantly. He's unrecognizable as Mr. Hyde. It's an incredible movie I can't say enough good things about. Drunken Master 2, starring Jackie Chan. You know, Warner Archive mostly released old classic movies, and I love them for that. And that's mostly all they do these days. But I kind of miss the days when they would release stuff like this occasionally. So this is a movie that I saw previously with some friends, but we saw the English dub, and like, the fight scenes were really good, but we couldn't get invested in the story or anything because the English dub was so bad. And I was really excited to buy this so I could see it in the original Cantonese, and I haven't watched it yet. So I need to watch this Blu-ray because I do really like Jackie Chan. Who doesn't? Edge of Darkness, really good Errol Flynn World War II movie about a Norwegian village that rises up against the occupying Nazis, led by Errol Flynn and Ann Sheridan. Really, really good movie. And then we've got, I haven't seen this one yet, Eye of the Devil, 1960s horror film. Always down for a 60s satanic horror movie. They were really big in that particular decade. And I'm excited to watch it. It's got Deborah Kerr, it's got David Niven, it's got Donald Pleasance. What a cast. I bet that's great. Next up, Flamingo Road, another one of this month's releases, starring Joan Crawford. Kind of a Mildred Pierce lookalike, but not quite as good as that, but a good movie. I definitely enjoy it. Then we've got Footlight Parade, my second favorite of the Busby Berkeley musical trilogy that Warner Archive released. This one's starring James Cagney. This is a fun movie. I don't think it's a great film. It also has the problem of holding all the musical numbers until the end. Again, I don't really like that because I miss the musical numbers through most of the movie, and then at the end it almost feels like too much. But it is definitely a good, very fun movie. I'm probably saying fun movie too much, and that doesn't tell you a lot. I'm going to try not to do that as much. Here's a movie I won't call fun because I've never seen it. And that's Freebie and the Bean, 70s buddy cop comedy, I believe, starring James Caan and Alan Arkin. So I love James Caan. I have no excuse for not watching this yet. I need to get to it. Next up, actually one of my favorite Amicus anthology horror films, From Beyond the Grave. I love Amicus. They're kind of like Hammer's little brother. They're not as good as Hammer, but they use a lot of the same casts, and the movies have a similar look. And they mostly made anthology movies, and they're all hit and miss, but this one, I think every segment is good. That's not something I can say about most Amicus anthologies. Enjoy them though I may. This one's pretty consistent. It's actually a little darker, more violent than most of them. Came out in the early 70s, 1973, like they all did. It's got David Warner. It's got Donald Pleasance. It's got an awesome poster. So I think especially for Halloween time, I really recommend seeking that one out. Then Gaslight. Oh boy, this is going to get me in trouble. I haven't watched this movie yet. The plastic is still on it. I bought it so long ago. I still haven't seen it. I've heard it's one of the greatest 1940s thrillers. It's got Charles Boyer, Ingrid Bergman, Joseph Cotton. Like, you can't go wrong with Gaslight. Gaslight has become like a trendy buzzword these days, but it does originate with this movie, so I need to watch it. You know what? On my Kino Lorber full collection video, somebody was disappointed that never happened. I really hope you're watching Guy Who Commented That, because it happened. Okay, Gold Diggers of 1933, my favorite of those Busby Berkeley movies. This movie is incredible. It has an incredibly funny premise. It has an amazing cast, and it sparses the musical numbers one by one throughout the movie. It folds them into the story. That all works very well, and it's got some of the absolute greatest musical numbers, I think, in any movie ever. You love Gold Diggers of 1933, especially when it comes to Joan Blondell. She's my favorite in that movie. Good news. I talked about this on my channel a long time ago, but I kind of love this movie. A 1940s musical starring Peter Lawford and June Allison. It's a college set musical. I'm always down for a college set movie. I really enjoy movies that take place on college campuses. I enjoyed my time of college, so I enjoy going back to that vicariously. And back to the 1940s, that's pretty cool. Really like that film. Okay. The Great Race. So I bought this because I'm a huge fan of Natalie Wood, and this is Natalie Wood with Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis. It's a pretty good movie. It's directed by Blake Edwards, who most people probably know him from like Breakfast at Tiffany's and such. The problem with this movie is it's really long, really, really long. Does it say exact on the back? 160 minutes. That's too long for a comedy about a race. And it really feels the length. There's good stuff in there, but my God, it is just way too long. Next up is Gun Crazy, one of the greatest noir films of all time from 1950. A classic Lovers on the Run. Probably my second favorite Lovers on the Run movie, right behind They Live by Night. This movie is my nightmare. It's where you're a man who's not a bad guy, and you just get dragged along this crazy adventure with a crazy woman, and she gets you involved in crime, and before long, your life is over because the police are all after you. It's a nightmare, and it scares me. I love it. The Hidden. Okay, I need to rewatch this movie. This is an 80s horror film that people love. It's directed by Jack Shoulder. I really like Jack Shoulder, particularly because of The Dark. What's that movie called? I'm looking at my Scream Factory shelf. Alone in the Dark. I think that's a great horror film. This is one where an alien travels from body to body. It can like possess people. It goes into people and kills a bunch of people. It's about some cops on their trail. And I thought it was okay, but people love it, so I need to see it. This was in my first ever Warner Archive order. My first time I bought Warner Archive Blu-rays was at one of their 4 for $44 sales. You guys remember those? And this was in the original stack. So that'll sentimental value right there. I need to rewatch it. Holiday Affair, one of my favorite Christmas movies, starring Robert Mitchum and Janet Leigh. I love Janet Leigh. She's just one of the most beautiful people to ever walk the earth, and she's so great. This is a really fun 1940s romantic comedy set around Christmas time. It's like the kind of movie Hallmark makes now, but if like a great director and great actors did it, you know, so it's like really well done, and a great screenwriter. So that's kind of how I would describe that one. Horror of Dracula, one of my favorite horror films of all time. Hammer, probably my second favorite Hammer movie. It's their original take on Dracula, and everything about it is brilliant. Next up, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. House of Wax. I was so happy when Warner Archive released this movie, because this movie got a Blu-ray release a long time ago, but it went out of print long ago, and I was so glad they gave it a re-release. It's a great Vincent Price movie. It came out kind of before Vincent Price was a big horror actor, and this movie set him down that path. But it almost has like the structure of a slasher movie, but it's a remake of Mystery in the Wax Museum, and I think it's a superior remake. This is a remake that's better than the original. Next up, It's Always Fair Weather, one of my favorite musicals of all time. When it comes to Gene Kelly musicals, everybody talks about Singing in the Rain, but more people should talk about It's Always Fair Weather. It's almost as good. It's got one of my favorite musical numbers of all time, which is Gene Kelly dance skating. He's on roller skates and he's dancing through the streets while rolling around on roller skates to a song called I Like Myself. I love that song. It's also got a more interesting premise than a lot of old musicals do, with some social commentary that I really liked. Okay, let's get the next stack over here. And we've got Out of the Past, one of the best noir films. I kind of caught some heat from my top 10 noir video because I didn't include this. A lot of people consider it the greatest noir film of all time. My thing with it is it looks amazing. It's directed by Jacques Tourneur. It has an incredible cast, one of the best casts of any noir film, with Robert Mitchum, Jane Greer, and Kirk Douglas. But I don't find the story super interesting. I think the story is good enough. I don't think it's as interesting as a lot of other noir films, and that's kind of my issue with it, but I still love it. Like, I've watched it several times, and I have it on Blu-ray, and I always will. Next up, Our Dancing Daughters, a silent film starring Joan Crawford. This actually came out in January of this year, and I really enjoyed it. It's kind of a romantic melodrama about a love triangle, and it's a silent movie, so that's not the kind of thing a lot of people are going to get excited about, but I did. I really liked it. Night Shift. This is one of my favorite comedies of all time. Certainly one of my favorite comedies of the 80s. Love that Warner Archive released this because this had no Blu-ray release of any kind before this. but it's starring Michael Keaton. It's really Michael Keaton's breakout role, along with Henry Winkler, the Fonz from Happy Days. And it's about them as these night workers who work the night shift at a morgue, and they use it to run a prostitution ring out of it. And it's weirdly inspiring because they help these girls who are in that line of work get away from pimps who are really bad guys, and they share more of the profits with them. They get them health insurance. So it's a really feel-good movie, and it's extremely funny, and Michael Keaton is brilliant in it. Oh, and the female lead is, I must mention her, Shelley Long, who's awesome in this. Next, Night School, 80s slasher movie. I love slasher movies from the 80s. I'm a huge fan. And this is one that I think is okay. It's classier. I think it's trying to be more of like a classy thriller than just a slasher movie. So it doesn't quite have a lot of the thrills that you expect with this genre. But it does have a killer wearing like a biker suit and biker helmet. So that's cool. I do like that movie. The Naked Spur. This is another one I was just ecstatic when Warner Archive released it. I've been waiting for a Blu-ray of this for a long time. Still not all of the Anthony Mann, Jimmy Stewart Western collaborations are on Blu-ray. I'm waiting for that to happen because they're all good. This one is one of my absolute top favorites. A dark story about Jimmy Stewart, who is a guy who's trying to be a bounty hunter and get Robert Ryan to justice. And it's a hard travel. It's got Janet Leigh too. And Ralph Meeker is this horrible guy who kind of teams up with them, and Jimmy Stewart can never trust him. Great film. Next up, Mystery of the Wax Museum, the other of the Michael Curtiz pre-code horror films that Warner Archive released. House of Wax is a remake of this. This one's starring Lionel Atwell, and I think it's pretty good. It's got like a plucky reporter subplot that's not great, and the remake was smart to leave it out. And it's got one of the worst endings of any movie I've ever seen. I hated the ending, the very, very ending so much. And the remake with Vincent Price smartly gets rid of that. But I think it's pretty good. It's got some spooky sequences for sure, but it's very close to the Vincent Price one. And it's hard not to compare it unfavorably. Murder, My Sweet, one of my favorite noir films, another Philip Marlowe film. Dick Powell is, against all odds, perhaps, an amazing Philip Marlowe. And this is a very intriguing, romantic murder mystery noir film, and it's just blissfully entertaining. Who directed it? Edward Dmytryk, I think is how you say his name. Yeah, he's great. Next up, we got Mark of the Vampire. Practically every time Warner Archive releases a horror movie, I get really excited because I think they're so good about releasing like 1930s horror films and such like that, when a lot of other companies aren't doing that so much. Mark of the Vampire is a Bela Lugosi vampire movie. It's like an incredible, gothically gorgeous vampire film for so much of the runtime. And in some ways it functions almost like an over-the-top kind of spoof of Dracula. Not spoof exactly, but just like an over-the-top sillier version, much because of the performance of Lionel Barrymore, who was Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. He's so funny in it. But the ending is slightly disappointing, but it's still an amazing movie, and I really, really dig it. Next up, Mad Love, another pre-code horror film I was so excited they released, starring Peter Lorre as a mad doctor who repairs Colin Clive's injured hands and gives him the hands of a dead murderer. And maybe the murderer's hands are going to turn Colin Clive to murder. It's awesome. Like, everything about this movie is firing on all cylinders. It's a great horror film. Peter Lorre is amazing in it. And Colin Clive is amazing in it too. Next up, The Long, Long Trailer, kind of the I Love Lucy movie, though it's not technically an I Love Lucy movie. It is a teaming of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, and they're on a road trip with a long trailer, and it causes a lot of stress when it comes to like maintenance and how hard it is to drive. And it's a movie of set pieces, comedic set pieces, and it's big and it's colorful and it's funny, so I enjoy it. Next up, Libeled Lady. If you like William Powell and Myrna Loy together in the Thin Man movies, which we'll talk about a little bit later, this movie is almost as good as The Thin Man. It is a brilliant screwball comedy. It's got one of my favorite premises for any screwball comedy ever. I think it's like the perfect romantic comedy premise. Look it up. I'm not going to get into it too much because we don't have too much time. Anyway, the cast is amazing. It's also got William Powell's real life girlfriend, Jean Harlow, and Spencer Tracy. One of the best Spencer Tracy roles, I would say. That might be controversial. Whatever. One of my favorite romantic comedies of all time. Next up, speaking of my favorite romantic comedies of all time, Joe versus the Volcano, which is from the early 90s. And once again, like I love that Warner Archive releases classic movies, but I kind of wish they would dip into the 80s and 90s a little bit more often than they do these days. Because when they do, we get stuff like this, which is the first teaming of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan before You've Got Mail, before Sleepless in Seattle. And It is a weird, kind of trippy movie in which Tom Hanks is dying of some weird disease, and he decides to throw himself into a volcano to appease the gods of the people who live on this island. He does it because they give him a bunch of money to do it, and he uses that money to live it up before he dies. So it sounds depressing, but it's not. It's really fun, and Meg Ryan plays 3 different roles in it, and she's so good. She's so fantastic. Next up, Ivanhoe. Funny enough about this movie, just this morning on TCM, I watched Knights of the Round Table, which is the other knight in shining armor film from the 50s, starring Robert Taylor and directed by the same guy, Richard Thorpe. And Knights of the Round Table is not half as good as Ivanhoe. I didn't think it was very good at all. And I like the King Arthur legend, so I was very disappointed in it. But Ivanhoe is actually really good. Robert Taylor's not great in it, but he's surrounded by a bunch of great actors like George Sanders, Elizabeth Taylor, and Joan Fontaine. And it's really good. It's exciting and romantic and really cool movie. Next up, we got The Pictures of Dorian Gray. I showed this off in a haul video just recently because I just got it this month, and I haven't watched it yet, but I intend to watch it before my end of month wrap up video, so I'll watch it very soon. Of course, it's the classic Oscar Wilde Picture of Dorian Gray story. I've heard it's an amazing adaptation, so I'm looking forward to seeing it. Next up, The Pirate, another movie I talked about on my channel a long time ago, but it's a kind of a disappointing movie. I was expecting a big MGM musical version of a pirate story starring Gene Kelly. And it's more of like kind of a misunderstanding that people think Gene Kelly is a pirate, but he's not really. So it's more romantic comedy than it is like action adventure, which I was a little disappointed about, to be honest with you. And it's okay. None of the songs really hit in this. That's probably my biggest problem with it. Next up, The Prince and the Showgirl. Okay, interesting enough. This just got released this month, and I wanted to review it in my Warner Archive new releases video I just did, and it took forever to get here. It took a long time for a lot of people. I don't know what was going on with this release, but I did get it. Haven't watched it yet, but once again, I intend to watch this before my end of month wrap up video. So look forward to that. The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, which is an Errol Flynn movie with him and Bette Davis. It's like a costume drama, a little bit action adventure, but more so just costume drama about the relationship between Queen Elizabeth and the Earl of Essex. And it's a very interesting movie with great dialogue, great performances from those 2 leads. I really dig that one. Pump Up the Volume. This is an excellent early 90s movie. I believe 1990. Yeah, just 1990. Starring Christian Slater. And he is a disaffected teenager who runs a pirate radio station and just like rants about the adults and the authority and stuff. And he's kind of like this anti-authority rebellious figure for the teens in this town. But it's like a secret identity thing because nobody knows he's the guy that runs this pirate radio station. And it's full of great music and great central performance. And I love that movie. It's awesome. I remember that movie got a ton of buzz when it came out from Warner Archive. People were so excited about this. Next up is Rancher Notorious, a Fritz Lang Western starring Marlene Dietrich, but more importantly, Arthur Kennedy. And I would compare this kind of to Johnny Guitar, but it's also like a hard-hitting revenge movie. I really like that Western. It looks very artificial, but in a really cool way, like purple skies as the backdrops and stuff like that. I think it's pretty cool. Ride the High Country, I'd probably still say this is my favorite Sam Peckinpah movie, and I think it was his first. It's incredible. It's starring Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea. It's like the final word on the Randolph Scott Western. Like if you love the Bud Bedecker Randolph Scott Westerns, this is like an epic goodbye to him and Joel McCrea as Western heroes, and it's awesome. It's a great movie. Next up, we got Running on Empty. This is a 1980s drama directed by Sidney Lumet, actually, of 12 Angry Men fame and many other movies. And it is an incredibly depressing family drama. And it's incredible. And it just made me cry, to be honest with you. It's starring the late River Phoenix, and he's the kid of parents. His parents were political activists in the 1960s, and they accidentally did something horrible during one of their activist stunts, and they've been on the run from the police ever since. So all he's known as his childhood is being on the run, going from town to town whenever the cops get onto them. And it's very, very sad, but very moving. I really love it. Next, we got The Satanic Rites of Dracula, another Hammer Dracula movie that Warner Archive released. And it's an okay movie. It's not great. I don't think it's the travesty that a lot of Hammer fans act like it is, but it's not very good. But I'm really glad Warner Archive released it because this is a film that fell into the public domain. So there are a lot of horrible looking versions of it out there that you can buy, and Warner Archive restored it properly, so it certainly never looked better. Next up, The Seahawk, one of the most classic Errol Flynn swashbucklers, and not one that I totally love, one that I like well enough. I think Errol Flynn's not playing a very interesting character here, and Brenda Marshall as the female lead is really a problem. They have no chemistry together, and again, she's an even less interesting character. So I don't think it's a great movie, but it's mostly like a propaganda piece for Britain during World War II, and okay, it works as that, I guess. The Seawolf. This is a movie I've heard is super great, and I haven't watched it yet. As you can see, the plastic's still on it. It's Michael Curtiz, I believe. Yes, directed by Michael Curtiz, some kind of a seafaring movie with an amazing cast of Edward G. Robinson, Ida Lupino, and John Garfield. I love all three of them, and it's crazy I haven't watched it yet. I'll watch this soon. I'm going to commit to that. If not this month, then next month. You'll see it in a wrap-up video very soon. Next. Am I going to edit that out? No, I'm not. I'm going to keep that. Showdown in Little Tokyo. It's almost hard to imagine Warner Archive releasing a movie like this now, but again, I kind of wish they would release stuff like this every now and then. This is a 1990s crazy buddy cop action movie starring Dolph Lundgren and Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee, of course, was the son of Bruce Lee. He tragically passed away far too young during the filming of The Crow. It's very sad, but it just makes all the movies he did make all the more precious. And this is probably my favorite Brandon Lee movie. It's directed by Mark L. Lester, who I think is actually a pretty good director of wild genre movies. He made a lot of pretty good ones, I think. And this is one of those. It's very short. It's only 78 minutes long. And it's just, a lot of banter and goofiness and punching and explosions. And when I'm in the mood for that movie delivers. Next up, we've got Some Came Running, one of the best 1950s melodramas I've ever seen, starring Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Shirley MacLaine. I talked about this movie pretty in depth in my last end of month wrap-up video. That was in February, because I just adore this movie. It has so much to say about the time in which it was made, about the 1950s, and about art in general, and the performances are amazing. And I just love it. Okay, I've talked about this movie several times because I love it so much. That's Sunday in New York. If I could push you to watch any Warner Archive Blu-ray more than anything, I might push you to watch this one. If you like romantic comedies, and this is a 1960s romantic comedy. It's probably my favorite rom-com from that decade, at least kind of like raunchy sex comedy. It's starring Cliff Robertson, Jane Fonda, and Rod Taylor, and it transports me back in time to 60s New York, and it's just so beautiful. It's so fantastical, really, and I love that movie. Next up, Tarzan's Greatest Adventure, a pretty good Tarzan adventure movie that's not great, that has too much stock footage, but it's enjoyable. The Tender Trap. I think this is an underrated movie. I really like it. I picked it up blind because Frank Sinatra is in it, and it's starring Frank Sinatra, Debbie Reynolds, and Celeste Holm. Celeste Holm was also with him in High Society, which a lot of people are clamoring for Warner Archive to release. So I gotta think they're gonna do it before too long. But anyway, this is a movie where if you want to watch Frank Sinatra be super cool in the 1950s, this is your movie. He is a Broadway performer agent who just likes being a cool single guy in the 50s. He kind of gets wrapped up into a relationship with Debbie Reynolds. He's not sure if he wants to settle down. She's weird and quirky and in a very strange way. And perhaps not a great movie, but a movie I really, really enjoy watching. And it's where the song The Tender Trap comes from, where if you don't know that song, it's a great song sung by Frank Sinatra. Tex Avery. Tex Avery Screwball Classics Volume 1. This is a collection of Tex Avery cartoons. I hadn't really seen many Tex Avery cartoons before this Blu-ray. I understand they looked pretty bad for a long time, and Warner Archive did some miraculous restorations with it. And I really enjoyed these cartoons. I grew up a Looney Tunes fan, so I'm a Looney Tunes man at heart. But these are really good. Kind of like subversive cartoons that they probably wouldn't make for kids nowadays. But that just makes them more interesting, right? Next up, The Three Musketeers, a pretty good swashbuckler with some amazing sword fights, but sometimes some draggy story and a central performance from Gene Kelly I don't totally love, but I do love the performance from Van Heflin and Vincent Price as the villain. I just wish he was in the movie more. Okay, we're getting into the Thin Man movies. So, I have got 5 of the 6 Thin Man movies. Warner Archive released all 6. I just haven't gotten to that 6th one yet. I got to do it. But it was a big deal for me when they released The Thin Man because I was a fan of this movie for a long time. I first got the DVD years ago at a pawn shop and just fell in love with the movie, watched it many times. And it was a big deal when Warner Archive released this. And when they continued releasing all the sequels, that was awesome. But I haven't actually watched all the sequels because I spend too much time rewatching this first one because it's so amazing. So the first Thin Man is amazing. After the Thin Man is in a highly worthy sequel, only a slight step down. It's also got a supporting performance from Jimmy Stewart, which is really cool. Another Thin Man, another slight step down. Maybe a more interesting mystery than the last couple too. This is where the central couple, William Powell and Myrna Loy, have a baby, which is great. I started watching Shadow of the Thin Man. I could feel a significant drop in the writing, and it kind of bummed me out, and I didn't finish it. But I'll get around to it. I'll finish it. I'm sure it has lots of good things to offer. Then I haven't watched The Thin Man Comes Home yet. I've heard that's great. And then Song of the Thin Man, I still need to buy. Final stack of Blu-rays. So first of all, we've got The Thing from Another World, one of the most classic, one of the best 1950s science fiction movies. Of course, John Carpenter would later remake this movie with The Thing, which many people consider the greatest horror film of all time. And this is still a really good movie. It's not quite John Carpenter, but it's excellent. It's great dialogue and characters and charm, in addition to having some cool science fiction stuff. Next, Tin Cup. I really like this movie. This is a movie I had on DVD for many years, and I was pretty excited when Warner Archive put it out. I'm a fan of Kevin Costner. I'm a big fan of Kevin Costner. I'm not going to downplay that. And I like him in sports movies. And this is almost like if Top Gun was about golf and Kevin Costner is like Maverick, but as a golfer, which is kind of a weird fit, but it works. I think it's a really enjoyable 1990s romantic comedy with him and Rene Russo. Next up, we've got To Have and Have Not. Could be my favorite of the Bogey and Bacall movies. It kind of feels like a movie where it very much got made because of the success of Casablanca. It feels a little bit too close to Casablanca in certain ways, even though it's based on Ernest Hemingway novel. But it really works for me. And the scenes between Bogart and Bacall are amazing. Like that's pure cinema right there. The two of them together. And this is the movie that they met on and would later get married and be super cute together. So Two on a Guillotine. Oh man, this is one I really want to recommend because I think this is a movie not a lot of people are paying attention to. It's a 1960s horror comedy starring Dean Jones. I really like Dean Jones. He's probably most known for doing a lot of Disney movies like The Love Bug and That Darn Cat. And this movie's kind of like actually I heard Brian Sauer on the Pure Cinema podcast or on the Just the Discs podcast. He called this movie a cross between Disney, like 1960s Disney, and William Castle. And that is an apt description. It is a very enjoyable, just like spooky fun kind of movie. Nothing scary, but it's just like spooky fun. And I really like the central romance between the main character, played by Connie Stevens, and Dean Jones, because Dean Jones is awesome. I'm just a big fan of that guy. Next up, we got Village of the Damned, classic black and white 60s horror film. Another movie John Carpenter would later remake. And I still haven't seen the John Carpenter remake, but I'll check it out soon because I've been kind of watching a lot of John Carpenter movies lately. And but I really like this movie, starring George Stevens, and it's about little kids being creepy, and I think it's good stuff. Next up, we got Wagon Master, a John Ford Western. This is one of John Ford's more low-key movies. It's not about like sheriffs versus bad guys. It's not that kind of Western. It's about exploration. It's about a wagon train going across the country to seek out a better life out in the West. And just kind of the idealized version of what the American West was. That's something John Ford was very good at depicting. And it's definitely a good movie. Very solid. This is a classic I haven't seen yet. I need to watch this. Wait Until Dark. This is Audrey Hepburn in the 1960s. One of the big classic thrillers of this era, playing a blind woman who her house is invaded by Alan Arkin and some bad guys. And she has to survive. I've heard it's amazing. I need to pop that Blu-ray in. I've had it way too long without watching it. Oh boy. Next up, While the City Sleeps. I actually just watched this movie. More on it in my March wrap-up video, but it's a Fritz Lang movie about tracking down a serial killer, but it's actually more about the fight for a media empire because Vincent Price runs this media company, newspapers, television, and he wants to choose somebody to run the business, and three guys are kind of fighting for the job. And a lot of the movie's about that, but Dana Andrews is awesome in this movie. It's a very charming Dana Andrews performance. Next, we got Wife vs. Secretary. I really like this movie. It's a 1930s film that doesn't fit into genre classifications very easily because it's kind of halfway between a drama and a comedy. But Clark Gable is married to Myrna Loy. They're very happily married, but she's suspicious because his secretary is played by Jean Harlow, who is, of course, incredibly beautiful. And that suspicion starts to hurt their marriage, and he starts to maybe consider an affair that he wasn't considering before that suspicion arose. And it's really good. Just just movie stars being movie stars and just a solid script. Next up is Without Love, a movie that I'm not actually a big fan of. Here's a controversial statement. I know Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy are one of the most classic real-life Hollywood couples, but in movies, I don't actually think they're that great together. I don't think they have great chemistry. I think Katharine Hepburn had much better chemistry with people like Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Humphrey Bogart. But Spencer Tracy and her, I think, are kind of blah together in movies. I understand the real life thing. But this is an okay movie about a couple of people who just aren't interested in love, who decide to be kind of domestic partners, live together as man and wife, but not actually have anything beyond platonic going on. Maybe they fall in love for real. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. It's got a pretty good sporting performance from Lucille Ball, and it's an okay movie. I don't know. It didn't do much for me. Next up, lastly, The Wonderful World of Brothers Grimm. I love this movie. It's an incredible fairy tale film that is partly about a biopic about the actual Brothers Grimm, but also shows their fairy tales. It shows 3 different fairy tales dramatized beautifully. It's a gorgeous film. Warner Archive did amazing work restoring it, and I just love this movie. That's a great way to end. So that's it. Something over 80 Warner Archive Blu-rays. That's everything I own. And that's not even counting what I will own in the future, because in April, Warner Archive is releasing quite a few really cool movies, and I'm really excited to talk to you about them next month. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this, would appreciate a like, would appreciate a subscribe, because I got more videos like this coming about old movies, about Blu-rays, stuff like that. Thank you all so much for sticking with the whole video, and I'll see you next time.